We are the year 4 and we are going to discuss about Unit 5 titled Computer-Mediated Communication as a fourth type of media or a quad media. What do we mean by quad media? According to the source, quad media is an association of media practitioners and internet bloggers advocating for change through communication in line with journalistic standards like live streaming and or webcasting webcasting of news and other programs that has a discussions and featured programs. And to have this, internet is the only thing that we need because if we do not have internet, we cannot do the live casting and webcasting. Though the internet has become impossible to ignore in the past 2 years, even people who do not have a computer, laptop, or cell phone, and people who have no opportunities to surf the net could not have a could not have missed the news stories about the internet. According to Morris and Ogan, internet as mass media. It says that with 25 million people estimated to be communicating on the internet, should communication researchers now consider this network of networks as a mass medium? Also, this paper proposes a conceptualization of the internet as a mass medium based on revised ideas of what constitutes a mass audience and a mediating technology. However, this paper argues that if mass communications researchers continue to largely disregard the research potential of the internet, their theories about communication will become less useful. About this internet as mass media, we will discuss this in the further discussions. Since the computer as a new communication technology opens a space for scholars to think assumptions and categories and perhaps even to find new insights into traditional communication technologies. And mass media researchers have traditionally organized themselves around a specific communications medium. For instance, the newspaper is a more precisely defined area of interest than printing press-mediated communication, just like also the brochures and magazines. Um, in traditional mass communication, it must be organized in the way they have the phone conversation, like they can send a text and receive the text, and also receive a text instant, and they can have instant messages and listen to the MP3s, radio, and TV, and also they can read and write. That's how they how they organize a specific communications as medium in the tradition of mass communication. Just like it mentioned there, the tradition of mass communication research has accepted newspapers, radio, and television as its objects of study for social, political, and economic reasons. As technology changes and media converge, those research categories must become flexible. Of course, there is a far more than a semantic difference between conceptualizing a new communication technology by its a communicative form than by the technology itself. Since this paper looks at the internet rather than the computer-mediated communication as a whole, in order to place the new medium within the context of other mass media. And next is constraints on internet research. Mass communications researchers have overlooked the potential of the internet for several reasons. According to Ringgold, the internet was developed in bits and pieces by hobbyists, students, and academics. Computer-mediated communication, or CMC, at first resembled interpersonal communication and was relegated to the domain of other fields, such as education, management information science, and library science. Both education and business Researchers have seen the computer as a technology through which communication was mediated, and both lines of research have been concerned with the effects of this new medium. The disciplinary lines have long kept researchers from seeing the whole picture of the communication process. In 1983, Cathcart and Compert recognized this problem when they noted how speech communication definitions, quote-unquote, have minimized the role of media and channel in the communication process. The speech communication definition shared meaning through the use of verbal and nonverbal symbols. It develops the confidence and effectiveness of their public speakers. They are interpersonal and small group communication skills. Um, in this, it may affect the speech communication, especially to those who have a deaf disability, so that they needed to minimize the role in media as the media and channel in communication process. And even as mass communication definitions disregarded the ways media function in interpersonal communication, quote-unquote, we are quite convinced that the traditional division of communication study into interpersonal, group, and public and mass communication is inadequate because it ignores the pervasiveness of media. These fields, in fact, have been doing research into CMC for nearly 20 years. Um, Galupe and Dennis said, many of their ideas about CMC have proven in looking at the phenomenon as mass media. And next is the emergence of new technologies such as GSS or group support system softwares that allows group decision making, which combine aspects of both interpersonal interaction and mass media, present something of a challenge to communication theory. With new technologies, the line between the various contexts begins to blur, and it is unclear that models based on mass media or face-to-face context are adequate, according to Poole and Jackson in 1993. The major constraint on doing mass communication research into the internet, however, has been theoretical. In searching for theories to apply to group software systems, researchers have recognized that communication studies needed new theoretical models of the changing media and the converge of the the media and internet. According to DEFLEUR and BALL-ROKEACH'S attitude towards computer in the 5th edition of the Theories of Mass Communication is typical. They compare computers to telephones, dismissing the idea of computer communication as mass communication. Even if computer literacy were to become universal, and even if every household had a personal computer equipped with a modem, it is difficult to see how a new system of mass communication could develop from its base alone. Since mass communication proves of creating, sending, receiving, and analyzing messages, a large audience via verbal and nonverbal or handwritten. It is wide-ranging, include print, digital media, and the internet, social media. That's why it is hard to it's difficult to see how a new system of mass communication could develop from this base alone. The fact that DEFLEUR and BALL-ROKEACH find it difficult to envision this development may well be a result of their own constrained perspective. In 1992, Lana Racco points out that the lack of research on the telephone was due in part to researchers' inability to see it is a mass medium. The telephone also became linked to women who embraced the medium as a way to overcome social isolation. Also, I agree in this because um, before the telephone is very important and this is the only medium that we use in communicating to someone as and it is a mass media and telephone was if they are lacking research on the telephone they have an inability to see it's a mass medium. Also, it's a mass medium because they can communicate through the telephone and just like the example like that just like the example of the link to women who embrace the medium as a way to overcome social isolation. That must be an um, effective way to be able to develop the new basic alone. And now, their thinking definitions. A new communication technology can throw the facades of the old into sharp relief. A new communication technology such as the Internet allows scholars to rethink rather than abandon definitions and categories. When the Internet is conceptualized as a mass medium, um, what becomes clear is that neither mass nor medium can be precisely defined for all situations, but um, but instead must be continually re-articulated depending on the situation. And also the internet is a multifaceted mass medium that is it contains many different configuration of communication. Its varied form shows that connection between interpersonal and mass communication that has been an object of study since two-step flow associated the two, according to Lazarsfeld, Baersol, and Godet 1944. And according to Chaffee and Maltz, 1988 have called for an exploration of this relationship that begins with a theory that spells out what effects are of interest and what aspect of communication might produce them. And now, let's go to the internet offers a chance to develop and to refine that theory. Internet communication takes many forms from World Wide Web pages operated by major organizations to Usenet groups discussing folk music to emails, messages among colleagues and friends. The internet communication forms can be understood as continuum. Um, um, the internet offers a chance to develop and refine that theory. How does it do this? Through its very nature. The internet plays with the source into message into receiver features um, of the traditional mass communication model, sometimes putting them into traditional patterns, sometimes putting them into entirely new configurations. And and the messages themselves can be traditional journalistic news stories created by a reporter and editor, stories created over a long period of time by many people, or simply conversations such as in an internet relay chat group. The receivers or audiences of these messages can also number from 1 to potentially millions and may or may not move fluidly from their role as audience members to producers of messages. Each point in the traditional model of the communication process can, in fact, vary from one to a few many of the internet. Sources of the messages can range from one person in email, for instance, in email communication, to a social group, in a listserv or Usenet group, or to a group of professional journalists in a World Wide Web page. Next is the viewing the internet as mass medium. Producers and audiences on the internet can be grouped generally into four categories. For the first is one-to-one asynchronous communication, such as emails. For number two, many-to-many asynchronous communication, such as Usenet, electronic bulletin boards, and list servers that requires the receiver to sign up for a service or log on to a program to access messages around a particular topic or topics. For the third is synchronous communication that can be one-to-one or one-to-few or one-to-many and can be organized around a topic, the construction of an object or role-playing, such as mods, multi-user, dungeons, and their various informations, as, mods, mocks, and moshs, internet relay chat, and chat rooms on commercial services. And lastly is the asynchronous communication, generally characterized by the receiver's need to seek out the site in order to access information, which may involve many-to-one, one-to-one, or one-to-many sources receiver relationship. Example is the websites, golfers, and feed sites. Thousands of commercial sources have created homepages or golfer sites for people to access their services or information about those services. And as of September 1995, search tools on the internet turned up as many as 123 different U.S. newspapers, services, and more than 1,300 magazine services with distinct websites. Some newspapers seem to be creating home pages to mark their place in cyberspace until their managers determine how to make them commercially viable. Others may be moving to the internet out of fear of the electronic competition. The internet is also being used for entertainment as well as information. It remains difficult to envision the future of traditional mass media on the internet. Who will be the audience? How will that audience access the information and entertainment services? And what profit might be made from the services, and the impact of the internet to communication on the audience. And credibility is another issue with mass media. Traditional mass media makes certain claims about the veracity of their information. The internet makes few such claims at the moment, and it is possible that the concept of credibility will also change as a result. For example, a feminist newsnet group, an individual began to post what appeared to be off-base comments to a serious discussions of a feminist issue, and then several days later, it was determined that Mike was a computer-generated personage and not real contributor to the discussion at all. And traditional mass media have addressed the issue within their organizations, hiring editors and fact-checkers to determine what information is accurate. Source credibility will vary on the internet, with commercial media sites carrying relatively more credibility and unknown sources carrying less. A much greater burden will be placed on the user to determine how much faith to place in any given source. To answer additionally to the questions, to what extent is that really the case? But what about the lurkers? Who are they and how big is this group? To what extent do lurkers resemble the more passive audience of television sitcoms, and why do they remain lurkers and not also become information providers? Is there something about the nature of the medium that prevents their participations? Another question relates to the interchangeability of producers and receivers of content. One of the internet most widely touted advantages is that an audience member may also be a message producers. And we may discover fair amount about the producers of messages from the content of their electronic messages. And the other questions concern production of culture, social control, and political communication. Will the internet ultimately be accessible to all? Yes, it will be accessible to everyone. The internet is very important nowadays because without the internet, how about our studies? How about our business? Um, how about how can we communicate to our family in the other countries? Internet is very important so that it is very accessible to all. And next is how are groups excluded from participation? Um, Computers were originally created to wage war and have been developed in an extremely specific, exclusive culture. And last is, can we trace those cultural influences in the way messages are produced on the internet? I guess yes, because you, because the internet has a very big impact in our society. So everyone trace their can trace those cultural influences in a way of messages because it is easily to communicate to someone, especially when you have internet. You can message someone in the email or messenger like that. Applying theories to CMC, O'Shea and Self stated that the learners as bucket theory had dominated. In this view, knowledge is like a liquid that is poured into the student. This brings up another aspect to consider in looking at mass communication research into CMC, the applicability of established theories and methodologies of the new medium. As new communication technologies are developed, researchers seem to use the patterns of research established for existing technologies to explain the uses and effects of the new media. Research in a group communication, for example, has been used to examine the group uses of email networks, according to Sproul and Kistler 1991. Um, Researchers have studied concepts of status, decision-making quality, social presence, social control, and group norms as they have been affected by a technology that permitted certain changes in the group communication. And according to Wartella and Reeves, this kind of transfer of research patterns from one communication technology to another is not unusual. As Wartella and Reeves note, researchers responded to the public controversy over the adoption of a new media technology in American life. The following established concepts seems to be useful starting points. Some of these have originated in the study of interpersonal or small group communication. Others have been used to examine mass media. Some relate to the nature of medium, while others focused on the audience for the medium. And that's it for my report. Thank you.
Good day, I am Lexi Dasig and I am the second presenter for Unit 5. So, in order for a medium to be considered a mass medium and therefore be viable for marketing, it has to have a critical mass of adopters. When the population isn't adopting to the new technology or medium, it cannot be considered as mass media. Rogers in 1986 states that the usefulness of a new communication system increases for all adopters with each additional adopter. We can use the current trend of social media in the Philippines as an example. Facebook has been around since 2004, but it is only in the mid to late 2000s that Facebook has been popular. With the internet becoming more and more accessible to the Filipino mass and the free Facebook feature that some telecom companies are providing, social media, especially Facebook, has reached the point of it being considered as a mass medium. Initially, the critical mass notion worked against adoption since it takes users to be critical and see it as beneficial before they will and can adopt. Valenta in 1995 notes that the critical mass is achieved when about 10 to 20% of the population adopted the innovation. When this level has been reached, the innovation can be spread to the rest of the social system. Taking our earlier example, according to Statista.com, it took Facebook 10 years to reach 25.87% of the population to become its users, increasing gradually each year. And in 2020, 96% of the Filipino people are using Facebook, making it a good platform for advertising, reaching a wide audience. So the concept of critical mass on the internet could be looked upon as a variable rather than a fixed percentage of adopters. Fewer people are required for sustaining an internet relay chat conference or a multi-user dungeon than may be required for an electronic bulletin board or another type of discussion group. So, a relatively large number of email users are required for any two people to engage in conversation. Yet, only those two people constitute the critical mass for any given conversation. For a bulletin board to be viable, its content must have depth and variety. If the audience, who also serve as the source of information for the BBS, is too small, the bulletin board cannot survive for the lack of content. So if no one contributes, the database cannot exist. It is stated in here that a much larger critical mass will be needed for such a group to maintain itself, perhaps as many as 100 or more. The discretionary data, as defined by Connolly and Thorne in 1991, is a shared pool of data to which several participants may separately contribute information. So it requires a critical mass of participants to carry the free riders in the system, thus supplying this public good to all members, participants, or free riders. Through applied organizations, this refinement of the critical mass theory is a useful way of thinking about listservs, electronic bulletin boards, Usenet groups, and other internet services where participants must hold up their end of the process through written contributions. Each of these specific internet services can be viewed as we do specific television stations, small town newspapers, or special interest magazines. None of this may reach strictly mass audience, but in conjunction with all the other stations, newspapers, and magazines distributed in the country, they constitute mass media categories. So the internet itself would be considered the mass medium, while the individual sites and services are the components of which this medium is composed. Interactivity has been assumed as a natural attribute of interpersonal communication, but is also applied recently to all new media, including the internet. According to Raffaelli in 1988, the most useful base of inquiry for interactivity recognizes three pertinent levels: two-way communication, reactive communication, and fully interactive communication. He notes that the concept of interactivity cuts across the mass versus interpersonal distinctions. It is also helpful to consider interactivity to be variable in nature, increasing or decreasing with the particular internet service in question. Though research of mass media use from a uses and gratifications perspective has not been prevalent in the communication literature in recent years, it may help provide a useful framework from which to begin the work on internet communication. The logic of the uses and gratification approach, based in functional analysis, is derived from the social and psychological origins of needs, which generate expectations of the mass media and other sources, which lead to differential patterns of media exposure or engagement in other activities, resulting in other consequences, perhaps mostly unintended ones. So Rosengren in 1974 modified the original approach in one way by noting that the needs in the original model had to be perceived as problems and some potential to be perceived as a solution to those problems needed by the audience. uh, Raffaelli in 1986 regards the move away from effect research to a uses and gratification approach. Take the smartphone as an example. In a fast-paced world, a lot of people use their device not just only for fashion or for games, but also for productivity, work, and studies. Additionally, the uses and gratifications approach presupposes a degree of audience activity, whether instrumental or ritualized, meaning researchers are assuming that the population is using a technology or medium on a regular basis. Social presence and media richness theory. Social presence theory stems from an attempt to determine the differential properties of various communication media, including mass media, in the degree of social cues inherent in the technology. In general, computer mediated communication, with its lack of visual and other nonverbal cues, is said to be extremely low in social presence in comparison to face communication. But media richness theory differentiates between lean and rich media by the number of cue systems within each medium. This puts CMC in a lean channel by being useful for simple or unequivocal messages. However, for receivers to understand more ambiguous, emphatic, or emotional information clearly, a richer medium should be used. Unfortunately, much of the research on media richness and social presence has been one-shot experiments or field studies. He notes that though researchers recognize that nonverbal social context cues conveys formality and status inequality, they have reached their conclusion about CMC or face-to-face differences without actually observing the very nonverbal cues through which these effects are most likely to be performed, giving room for the development of internet communication in social presence and media richness. It could turn out that the internet contains a very high degree of media richness relative to other mass media, to which it has insufficiently been compared and studied. So, Grant in 1993 has suggested that researchers approach new communication technologies through network analysis to better address the issues of social influence and critical mass. Conceptualizing internet communities as networks might be a very useful approach, given that internet communication is continuously evolving. Studying network of users of any given internet service can incorporate the concept of interactivity and the interchangeability of message producers and receivers. But although computers allow a more efficient analysis of network communication, researchers will need to address the ethical issues related to studying people's communication or conversations without their permission. The internet, from this perspective, will allow researchers both to continue to use the structures of traditional media studies and to develop new ways of thinking about those structures. As Kuhn points out, scientists facing something new can often agree on the particular symbolic expression appropriate to it, even though none of them has seen that particular expression before. So the problem becomes a taxonomic one: how to categorize, or more importantly, how to avoid categorizing in a rigid structure so that researchers may see the slippery nature and ideas such as mass media, audiences, and communication itself.